Okay, well what I'm going to do today is show you how to go about adjusting the vertical alignment on the rangefinder for a Retina 2C or 3C camera. So the first thing you need to do is get in. So this is a Retina 2C. We'll start here. Put something through the fork of the rewind to hold it. Unscrew the rewind knob with your fingers. Take a screwdriver, single screw at the end of the top housing here, 2 screws at the rewind end here, and the top should lift off. Let's give it a bit of a wriggle to get it off the film release button here, and here's your shutter release button. Now I've said this many times, do not remove the shutter release shaft. You'll end up with lots of grief. Don't tip the camera upside down, it'll fall out, you'll be in trouble. That's a 2C, that's all you need to know about how to get into a 2C. The 3C, 3 small C, comes in 2 flavours. One has a single range meter, that's the same as the later 3 big C cameras. One has a twin range meter. The twin range meter is easily recognised by the metal flat, and if that's been snapped off and rendered the meter useless, it can be recognised by the frame around the cell, which is clearly metal, not plastic. So that's a Retina small C, 3 small C, the earlier type. Same business to take the top off, something through the rewind fork, spin off the rewind knob. The meter dial, leave it alone, it comes off with the top of the camera. Don't start taking it off, you'll end up with lots of grief. That screw is very, very vulnerable to damage. It's soft, it's brass, easily broken. Don't remove it unless you absolutely have to. And you don't have to remove it to look at a rangefinder adjustment. So the top for one of these cameras, single screw at the end, 2 screws at the rewind, lift the top cover off, wriggle it off carefully, same deal, do not remove anything. The third camera here is the latter 3 small C camera, single range meter. The meter is basically the same as was used for the Retina 3 big C cameras, and you deal with it in the same way. So first thing you want to do is take note of the setting of the meter. So I rotate the dial clockwise as far as it will go. Then I take note of where the mark here on my film speed dial, at the end of that scale next to the 1300 mark in this case, that mark, I note where it is, and in this case it's halfway between 18 and 17. That's important because you've got to put it back in the same place, otherwise your meter will be inaccurate. So far so good, taking note of that, writing it down so you remember. You need to unscrew the screw from the centre of the meter dial here. The meter dial does not lift off with the top cover. You need a tool to do that. Here I've got a screwdriver that's been dealt to with a Dremel to leave 2 pins to engage with that screw. So we can lift off our meter dial. I'm very carefully keeping my camera parts here organised. The rewind comes off in the same fashion, something through the fork to stop it spinning, loosen it with your fingers, lift it off. The top cover, much the same. Single screw at the right hand end, 2 screws at the rewind end on the top. These screws are all chromed brass, reasonably easily damaged, so you need good screwdrivers. Lift the top cover off. Hold your finger on the top of the meter so it doesn't lift off with the top cover. Wriggle the top cover off. And there we have the rangefinder. Now the rangefinder on these 3 cameras are all the same, absolutely identical. If you need to adjust the rangefinder for the vertical adjustment, the adjustment is made here. There are 2 screws visible on the top plate there. Now, how is this achieved? Okay, so looking through the viewfinder, you move the focus backwards and forwards so that you have some slight separation between the rangefinder images on a suitable target. And I usually just look out the window, and I've got some very good spots here to line it up on. But basically, take note of which image it is that moves when you swing your focus lever backwards and forwards. Now, the moving image, the one that moves when you move your focus ring backwards and forwards, in order to raise that, you need to slightly loosen the front screw and slightly tighten the rear screw. If the moving image is too low, you need to slightly loosen the rear screw and slightly tighten the front screw. Now the adjustments required are very slight, and you'll just work backwards and forwards until you're happy that the images are now vertically aligned and moving in the same plane. That's all you need to know about vertical alignment, the rangefinder images in these cameras. If you need to adjust the horizontal alignment, normally this is achieved by choosing a suitable target. There's a couple of ways you can go about this. The simplest way is to look out the window at a suitable target that is effectively at infinity. And for at infinity, basically it means anything that's about 400 yards away or more is practically going to do the job for you. I've got a few targets here spaced at least that distance and twice that distance, so I can check to see how the alignment's done. So, what happens with this? Let's zoom in a little bit here. The adjustment is done at this point. Now, there are various screws seen here. This one here, closest to the window, that's the pivot. Leave it alone, you don't need to touch it. The second one is where the adjustment is made. The third one locks that adjustment. So to make an adjustment, you slightly and only slightly loosen that screw there, the one in the middle, and then your adjustment is made by turning this screw in one direction or another. You turn it in one direction, it will effectively move the arm outwards, allowing the rangefinder to fall back more to the infinity position. If you turn it the other way, because it's eccentric, it will pull the arm in, effectively meaning that taking the rangefinder closer to the close focus position. And you just move that backwards and forwards until, typically you're using this on an infinity target, that when the focus is set at infinity here, that the images align in your rangefinder. Once you're happy that that's set, just lock that lock screw and then test it again and make sure that you're absolutely happy that that's the case. Generally speaking, that's all you're going to need to do. Occasionally, particularly if a camera has been disassembled and played with by someone who had no idea what they were doing, you'll find that when the infinity position is correct, the rangefinder is incorrect at a close focus position. And that's the adjustment for this starts getting messy, because the close focus adjustment is made at this end. There's a single screw there that locks it, and basically you swing that backwards and forwards through an arc and lock it again. Now as soon as you disturb that, it will disturb your infinity position, and so you have to work backwards and forwards between the two in order to get a balance where you have the infinity working correctly, the focus at infinity, and the focus at a close focus distance. When everything is working absolutely correctly, you can put your camera on a tripod and you can set it up a measured distance from something like a computer screen and choose a suitable high contrast image on your screen. You can use that to help you align your focus distance. And then you would be setting it to match one of the distances on the scale perhaps here. Well, this one's marked in feet, so I would probably choose 3 feet or 4 feet and set my tripod that distance away from the screen. And the distances, particularly at close distances, typically they're measured from the film plane, and the film plane is somewhere about here, not right at the back and certainly not at the front of the lens. The film plane sits about here, and that's roughly where you would get your dimension. When I was reviewing my video, I noticed that I probably hadn't explained the horizontal alignment adjustment for the rangefinder as well as I might have done. And the important point that I missed is this, that when aligning the images in the rangefinder so that they are aligned correctly at the infinity position, it's important that they align just at the infinity position, and as soon as you start to move your focus ring to a slightly closer distance, that those images should no longer be aligned. This is important because it's not the alignment of the images in the rangefinder that determine the sharp image on the film plane. That's determined by the position of the lens relative to the film, which is determined by the focus ring in this case. The rangefinder is simply here as an aid to let you know what position this ring is likely to be in. So saying that again, when the images are nicely aligned here at an infinity target, with your focus ring obviously at the infinity position, as soon as you move the focus scale slightly away from infinity, you should notice that the images are no longer aligned in the rangefinder. So after that, once you've got everything set back up again and happy, all you need to do is put the top back on the camera and you're good to go. So I've got to make sure now that I actually put the right top on the right camera, and I've been careful not to drop anything. So I'll wriggle that top cover on and I'm good to go. Now one thing worth noting, if you've got one of the Lectra 3 small C cameras, typically they will have a little rubber buffer or pad glued in here, a little vaguely crescent shaped. This one's missing. It's a useful thing. It holds down the meter, stops it from rattling around on the body. So if you get a little piece of rubber fall out while you're playing with your camera, that's what it is, and it needs to be glued back in here, into that recess. In this camera I see that's missing. That is by no means an uncommon situation. So now I've just got to put everything back. And you may be wondering how rangefinders come to be out of adjustment in the first place. Well, typically they'll be out of adjustment because the camera has received some shock typically. So it means it's been dropped, and that's caused things to shift. The rangefinder itself is held to the top of the camera body with 2 screws, and screws do work loose over time. That's just entirely normal. That screw won't start for me, I'm just not sure why that is. I'll have to deal with that later. I want to pop these 2 screws back in. Yes, as I was saying, rangefinders lose their adjustment if the camera's been dropped typically. That's typically what happens. It's of course not a very uncommon thing at all. Often there's nothing to show you on the camera what may have happened because there'll be no damage visible. And typically that means that the camera has been in its case, in which case it's been protected by the leather. So I'm just putting this rewind knob back on. Basically it's the same deal here. Making sure it does pull all the way back up. And here I want to get my meter dial back on. This is the single range meter. So I've got that back on in place. I'll run that screw down till it's fairly snug, not all the way. And now I need to check the position of my dial. And my meter dial has just moved slightly there, I can see, so I want to get that alignment mark back up between the 18 and the 17 on this camera. Tighten that screw down, that's not moving anywhere. My alignment mark is where I want to start it off with it. And so if the meter was accurate before, it's accurate now. And that particular camera, that's how you close it up. Here we have the 2C. Now the 2C rangefinder is adjusted in exactly the same way. Putting the top back on is just a case of wriggling this down into place. And it should do. I'm just checking that everything's aligned correctly. And something doesn't want to go. That's better. That's good. And it's the same deal, of course. 2 screws at the rewind end. Of course, if you ever dismantle a rangefinder for cleaning, you can guarantee that you're going to have to adjust it afterwards because nothing ever goes back exactly as it was before. And the relative positions of the components, the semi-silvered mirrors, the lenses and the prisms in the rangefinder will have moved. They don't need to move much, of course. A very small fraction of a millimetre would make a very big difference. Right, not quite picking that up. I'll just make sure that shaft's popped up. Put that cap on there. Run this back on. Oh, it doesn't want to pick up today. That's better. Screwdriver through the fork. That's good. That's all that's required with the 2C. Finally we have the 3 small C, and putting the top cover back on this is very much the same. just drops down into place with a little bit of wriggling. Two screws at the rewind end. A single screw here, which in the case of this model actually screws into the end of the meter housing. There's our top cover back on, and the rewind knob should screw on. Something through the fork to stop it turning. Tighten it with my fingers. That's it. So for getting the tops of the cameras off and back on again, and for making your simple adjustments to the rangefinders, that's all that's required.